Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a respected advertising professional and an author from Singapore, Mr. Vasanth Seshadri. Vasanth, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh, for having me on the show. It's
Thanks.
good to be here.
Thank you. Vasanth is the founder and creative director of the Sunnyside Advertising, an independent advertising agency in Singapore. He's the author of 3 books: The Creative Human, which he wrote in 2023, The People from Beyond the Mountains in 2021, and Cultural Engineering in 2020. Vasanth has also worked with BBDO in New York and JWT Singapore, and he's been recognized and awarded several times. So, Vasanth, my first question. Being an advertising professional, what inspired you to start on your own?
So I started out in advertising in 2009. That was 16 years ago. And until 2018, the first 9 years, I worked for bigger advertising agencies, such as the ones you mentioned. And the learning from those agencies is phenomenal. But at the same time, um, there are also like well-documented limitations of big agencies in terms of the slowness of getting things done, the massive number of layers and silos that impede the way work gets done, and also all the overheads that get added on to the clients, and therefore clients pay for things that are beyond the work, that don't translate into the work. And
Right.
like many others I've observed, I felt maybe there is a nimbler way of doing things,
Mm-hmm.
a way that kind of uh, ensures that nothing gets in the way of doing like good advertising.
Mm.
And maybe there's a brighter, more cheerful way of doing things and
Mm.
adding value to clients. Yeah.
That's wonderful. But large agencies have their own strengths in terms of being able to get clients very, very easily, if I can use that term. What
Yeah.
are some of the biggest challenges of running an independent agency?
Mm, Actually, it's related to what you just mentioned, which is if you're a big agency with a big name and reputation, it is easier to get clients because clients just have to hear your name and they get convinced that you would do a solid job for them.
Mm.
Definitely, I would say that as a new agency, earning the trust of clients uh, is an ongoing challenge, and ultimately the work speaks for itself, and that's
Mm.
why the people who have given us projects have typically come back to give us more projects.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, you worked with some of the world's biggest brands like P&G and Unilever. What are some key takeaways for you as an advertising professional when you work with such big brands?
Hmm. I would say P&G and Unilever are universities of marketing,
Hmm.
and the people there are very well trained, and not only when they are there, but even when they're alumni of P&G or Unilever, they take the training wherever
Mm.
they go, and there's a very clear systematic step-by-step, I wouldn't say process because process feels very mechanical, but there
Mm.
is a way of working in P&G and Unilever that strengthens the work that gets done, and ensures that the work is not just a vanity project, but also it's business building, it's brand
Mm.
building.
Mm.
And once you're used to that, you're actually uh, you become very strategic in your thinking, even if you're creative. Uh,
Mm.
you become good at coming up with ideas that are not only wacky, clever ideas, but also ideas that persuade, ideas that change minds, ideas that build brands.
Mm. And over the last 2.5 decades that you've been in advertising, what are some perceptible trends you have seen, and what are some changes that you have observed?
I wouldn't say 2.5 years. I would say like 16 years.
I said 2.5 decades, but
2.5 decades. I would say no. I mean, I wouldn't say 2.5 decades. I would
mm.
say 1.5 decades.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
16 years.
I stand
Uh,
corrected.
I
Mm.
started out when I started out, like digital marketing was still very niche and very new in the
Mm.
sense that there was a mainstream advertising industry and then
Mm.
like small digital teams like attached onto them. Like there would be a small digital team in every agency,
Mm,
um, but it was still primarily TV and print.
mm,
Uh, Now I would say the mainstream advertising industry itself has become one that is more digital,
mhm,
and that is where digital has to be integrated into every part of what we do.
mm,
The point where any idea we think of has to have legs across mediums, and
mm.
um, it's no longer siloed. It's kind of integrated, which is good. Yeah. So that is one thing.
So, I've often been told by marketing and advertising people that creativity in advertising and marketing is much greater than any other field. I'd love to
Hmm.
get your perspective.
Mm, I would say the creativity in marketing and advertising uh, needs to be better because uh, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just about the vanity of satisfying the person creating, but it's also got purposes of brand building and persuading people to like change behaviors in many cases. So I'd say compared to something like writing poetry, which is often like something we do because we enjoy, or like painting
Mhm.
casually, or I mean those things are just writing a novel. Like once one of my books was a novel which I just wrote uh, for satisfaction. I mean those so-called pure creative fields are can just be for the satisfaction of the person creating. But in
Mm,
marketing and advertising, it needs to serve a purpose for the for two groups of people. Firstly, it needs to serve a purpose for the people consuming the advertising, which is the common people who need to feel persuaded to change their behavior,
mm,
either when it comes to purchasing a brand or sometimes even in case of something that's good for the society. That's one group. And
mm,
another group is actually the people who are paying us to create the advertising, which is our clients. And they obviously need to see results in terms of like a better brand, more brand love, or I mean things like more brand love, which are intangible or sometimes very tangible stuff like sales. I mean they need to
mm.
see. So we're not just creating for ourselves; we're creating for a lot of people, and so that gives us like
Yeah,
a higher bar to reach.
well said. Well said. The other aspect of advertising is the entire approach to storytelling. What are some core elements in your view that can make a brand truly resonate?
Mm, I'd say a brand needs to connect with people at level of their feelings, their
Mhm,
hopes, their fears, their dreams. And it needs to be either like touching in the sense that it touches them at an emotional level, or it needs to make them laugh,
mm,
or it needs to evoke an emotion that is uh, that kind of makes them like not tap on that skip button or
mhm,
not switch off the TV or change the channel.
mm,
Or it's like not sure if it was David Ogilvy who said that people don't consume ads. They consume what interests them, and sometimes it's an ad.
mm,
So in order to interest them, it needs to be either funny or emotional, or it needs to have um, some sort of resonance.
mm. Fascinating. And what, in your view, is the role of technology, particularly AI, in modern advertising? And do you see it as a threat or as an opportunity?
In the last couple of years, I find that more and more like agencies as well as marketers like are finding use cases for AI, especially generative AI in in a in terms of generating images and generating text. For example, a very boring but important, valuable use case is that um, before generative AI, when we had to like say mock up some ideas at an early stage when the ideas are still at a conceptual stage, um, we had to make do with what the stock images we can find, which never really convey the idea adequately.
Mm,
But now a lot of art directors are using generative AI to create very precise images that bring an idea to life visually,
mm.
even though it has not obviously not been executed, and that's why we are proposing it to the client. So
Right.
that is one thing. And another thing is from a writing standpoint, I mean, I started out as a copywriter and I still do a lot of writing, so I'm a bit snobbish in that I trust myself more than I trust ChatGPT.
Mhm,
But in for a lot of clients, actually, maybe this is a threat for agencies. A lot of clients are thinking maybe with the help of ChatGPT or Claude or Microsoft Copilot, I can write headlines myself.
Mm.
And actually, so far, when I experimented with some of them, the headlines are pretty good.
Mhm.
And so there is always a threat element, but I think in the run, we stand to gain more because it's like when, I mean, if you go back a century, when tractors were invented, that didn't put farmers out of work.
Correct.
That farmers learned to use the tractor, and it kind of they were able to say
Correct.
outsource to the tractor some of the
Absolutely.
more the more basic but more like back-breaking jobs, and they could do
Mm.
things that are a little bit more
Yeah.
knowledgeable. Like they
Yeah.
could.
Well said. Absolutely right. My next question is that with attention spans decreasing, and most people now want to see, hear a message in 10 seconds. What is your strategy to capture customer interest within a few seconds?
Mm, I'd say it needs to be like a little bit different, like a little bit unexpected. No, I mean, I always say when you say dog bites man, there is nothing surprising about it. But when you
Mm.
say man bites dog, that is surprising.
Mm.
And it's like recently, I'm not. You might have seen this campaign in like billboard campaign in India that Britannia, the biscuit brand, did, where they actually did billboards that hugged the shape of the trees in front of it. Instead of cutting down the tree, instead of letting it be hidden, it actually kind of respects the shape of the
Yeah.
tree and uh, weaves around it. And that's the kind of thing which, if you look at it, you will stop and notice because it is so different from anything you've seen before. And even if you have 10 seconds, you will look at it for the first 10 seconds. And because it's interesting enough, you look at it for another 10
Mm.
seconds. And you look at, if you find a second billboard that is part of
Yeah.
the uses the same technique, you will notice that again. So
Mm.
it's a case of capturing the attention the first 10 seconds to the point where they would even spend 10 minutes on it.
Very interesting. Very interesting. But now let's move to talking about your books. You're an author of 3 books. Your book, The Creative Human, explores creativity deeply. Tell me more about this book and what was the inspiration to write it?
Mm, so it's a book that I intend as a comprehensive study of creativity in all its
Mm.
forms.
Mm.
It starts out talking about what is creativity and giving a brief history of like tens of thousands of years of creativity in whatever. I mean, of course, it can't be exhaustive because I mean,
Sure.
history lesson is not the intention.
Mm.
But after that, it kind of gets into like what are the creative habits that we can have and to be more creative and what makes creative people creative. And then I have a large portion in the middle where I talk about creative techniques that have been useful, and I have 15 of them actually with examples of how that technique has been useful in various creative fields.
Give me an example of maybe 1 or 2 of the techniques.
Mm, One of those would be make something bigger or smaller. For example, there was this IKEA banner ad that called itself the world's smallest store.
Mm.
The world's smallest store, and because each pixel of it of the little banner ad had a link to a different product.
Mhm.
When you make something really big or really small, that is one way to stand out from the crowd.
Mm.
And another one would be to give a twist to something familiar. Like there was this there's this chain that infants in Afghanistan are given, and
Mm.
then there was an agency, actually, it's an agency from India, McCann Erickson in India, which did this thing where they gave a little twist to that object, where they
Mhm.
added little beads, and each bead represented a vaccination that the kid
Mhm.
has received. So any doctor in any part of like a remote mountainous country like Afghanistan
Mm.
could see how many doses of which vaccinations have been given to
Mm.
each infant.
Mm.
So
Very
when you take
interesting.
something very familiar and you
Yeah.
give it that's a good way to be creative.
Fascinating. Fascinating.
And after I talk about the creative techniques, I talk
Mm.
about evaluating ideas because the
Mm.
techniques were lead you to a lot of ideas, but then you have to filter them down. And then what are the filters that you need to use to evaluate?
Hmm.
After that, what are the things you need to keep in mind while you execute it? And then at the end of the book, I talk about the possibilities of technology.
Hmm.
And yeah.
Very interesting. You also discuss habits of highly creative people in your book. What are three habits that can enhance everyone's creative potential?
Mm, I would say one very important habit is to be a sponge for new experiences.
Mhm.
That you have to like meet the kind of people you don't usually meet, go to the kind of places you don't usually go to, watch the kind of things and listen to the kind of things and read the kind of things that you don't typically uh, consume. And I think that's a very good way to um, like have the raw material kicking about in your head to be creative. So that would be the first one. And then another habit of really good creative people is they push themselves beyond the expected. Like
Hmm.
when you first start to think of ideas, the first few ideas that will come to mind will be quite basic ideas, the kind
Hmm.
of ideas that will come to most people's minds. And a creative who's just starting out and inexperienced may be satisfied with those first few and just move forward with it. But as you get more experience, as you spend a bit more time um, in the industry, you'll realize that you need to push beyond those first few ideas, and only then the really good ideas uh, come in. But actually, beyond that, if you keep pushing, beyond a point, you will reach a stage of diminishing returns, and that's when you will know that you have exhausted like all possible directions.
Hmm.
So beyond the obvious, that is
Well
the
said. But
habit.
the other question that I would have for you, Asant, is that do you believe people are born creative or can they be made creative?
Hmm, I think everyone has the raw material, like the seed in them to be creative. And I mean, of course, not everybody can be a Leonardo da Vinci type creative genius, but I mean that you have to be born with it if you're that level of a creative genius.
Hmm.
But I would say like most people have the seed in them to be creative in one way or another,
Hmm.
but not everyone has the opportunity to identify what it is that they are creative in and
Hmm.
also have the ability and the resources to kind of nurture that in them.
Hmm. Well said. I've time for two or three more questions. Your book, Cultural Engineering, discusses how brands can drive cultural change. Could you share an example of how a brand could drive cultural change?
Mm, I can think of like a couple of examples, and just to be balanced, I'll give one example from P&G and one from Unilever.
Hmm.
Wait, actually, come to think of it more, yeah, so yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I mean, not that I'm doing it deliberately to be balanced, but I just
Hmm.
happen to think of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the one from Unilever, I would say, the like it's been going on for 20 years, the Dove campaign for real beauty.
Hmm.
Um, Before it started, I mean, it started when it started 20 years ago, it was like there was no body positivity movement or anything of that sort. People were still, I mean, the idea of you're beautiful the way you are was just not there. It was
Hmm.
actually that created that.
Hmm.
Dove, through a series of campaigns like Dove sketches and before that the Dove Evolution film. So
Hmm.
that kind of led the way to the culture where you deviate from stereotypical perceptions of beauty and you appreciated a diversity of what is beautiful. So that is one.
Hmm.
So and that's a Unilever one. And then uh, I'm sure if I mean being in India, you've heard of the multi-year Share the Load campaign,
Hmm.
where by B&G, by Ariel to be precise, where they kind of invited like husbands to share the load of
Hmm.
laundry,
Hmm.
so that their wives are not the only ones doing it. And as I mean, of course, I've guard against using statistics too much, but in the 10 years that the campaign has been around, the percentage of men who believe that they should play an equal role in the household chores has
Hmm.
increased substantially as a result of the campaign.
Hmm.
So these are two examples I've talked about at
Interesting.
great length in the book.
Yeah, and they're great examples. So, two more questions for you.
Yeah.
Your novel has themes of sustainability and climate change. How can brands authentically engage with such major social issues?
I would say, we hear a lot about the danger of greenwashing. I think that's when a brand talks a good talk about sustainability and has like ads about it, videos about it, but doesn't really do anything beyond that. I think the best way for a brand to be sustainable is to look at their processes and see what are the processes they can optimize. How can they optimize it to be more sustainable? And even in something like the product development itself, like Tide, another P&G brand a few years ago, they invented a new set of Tide pods that used substantially less water. And by helping like millions of people use substantially less water, it kind of saved like a huge amount of I don't know the exact amount, but
Sure.
a huge amount of water, and that is a better way to be sustainable than to just put out a series of ads about it.
Correct. Well said. And my last question for you, Vasanth. You've got 3 books. Which of your books do you think has had the biggest impact and why?
Mm. So far, I would say cultural engineering has had the biggest impact. And though it's the oldest of the 3, it is actually outperforming the other 2 in sales even today. And also some pretty famous people. I don't want, in the interest of like preserving their privacy, I don't want to say.
Absolutely. I don't want any names at all.
Some pretty famous people that if I mention their names, you would absolutely definitely know them. They have appreciated the book. So
Good.
it hasn't happened to the other 2 books yet. Hopefully it'll happen someday.
I'm sure.
I
But
think
on that note, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
I think the reason it's doing well is that it's about, cliche alert, but it's about making the world a better place, and that is something that kind of appeals to a lot of people. I think that's what's still doing well.
Correct. Well said. And on that note, Vasanth, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your journey. I think we had a fantastic conversation on advertising. You gave us some great stories from P&G and Unilever. We talked a little bit about technology, about AI. We also spoke about your books. Thank you for speaking to me and good luck to you.
And thank you for having me, Ashutosh.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.